Hi, this is the Social Gelo with Angelo show. My name's Angelo. I'm a social scientist, surfer, martial artist, and a whole lot of other things. Coming to you live from Kasai City, Japan, the Social Gelo with Angelo show.
Hey, what's up, y'all? And welcome to another episode of Social Gelo with Angelo podcast. Today I'm here with Ron Baker Jr. and Tom, and I'm going to have Tom say his last name for me.
Theofanopoulos.
There it is. Today's topic is, why does your Kenpo or Kajukenbo need Jiu-Jitsu? I'm going to have to bring out and drag out a troll. This guy's been trolling me every time I post on the Kenpo future, past, and present. I probably said that wrong. I think it's like past, present, future. Either way, on that page, there's this Kenpo guy who keeps trolling me. He's also a Kajukenbo guy, turns out. And he keeps saying, why do you keep posting non-Kenpo stuff on the Kenpo page? He gets really upset if I put Jiu-Jitsu stuff or boxing stuff. That's not Kenpo, he says. And my argument is, it should be. And there's this weird Kajukenbo-Kenpo connection, and this podcast is not going to be about that. I'm going to do one on that later. But just to kind of catch you all up, for if this is your first episode, Kenpo and Kajukenbo on paper are very similar, and they tend to do this a lot, with a lot of Kenpo practitioners jumping into Kajukenbo, and a lot of Kajukenbo practitioners sometimes doing Kenpo. And in the history, I think even one of, I know one of Ed Parker's certificates was signed by our founder, Cesar Imprado, one of his black belt certificates. So like, there is this connection because of that in Chow. But jumping to the present, if your style of Kenpo, unlike karate, unlike taekwondo, unlike even more strict styles like jiu-jitsu, for example, being one style, you are allowed to mix. That's the thing that makes Kajukenbo what's Kajukenbo. Now, Kenpo itself is doing this with the new program of Kenpo 2.0, I think it is. Have you all heard of that?
Yeah, Jeff
Kenpo.
Speakman's organization,
right? And he's been bringing in jiu-jitsu as well, and bringing in more of a mix, a little more kickboxing, a little more of a mix. And if you look at Kenpo's history, that's always been kind of a mix. So my argument is, you need to have jiu-jitsu in your Kenpo, and people need to stop bitching about the idea that, oh, that's not Kenpo. Okay, well, let's say it's not. It should be. If your goal is real self-defense, it should be. That's my argument. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? That's why I brought in Ron Baker Jr. and Tom, who might be a little biased because of his background, to talk about whether or not, let's start with this. How does jiu-jitsu not fit into Kenpo? Let's just start right there. Normally I'd say, how does jiu-jitsu fit into Kenpo? How does jiu-jitsu not fit into Kenpo? And I'm gonna grab this question and first give it to Tom and then give it to Ron.
not fitting. Well, if you identify yourself as a striker, I think that's the biggest problem in martial arts, is that people identify as either a striker or a grappler. And so when you take one position, you tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater and give up the other position. You know, that's what I see anyway. But for me, martial arts was martial arts. It would include picking up a rock. It would include, weapons, free hand, whatever it took to defend yourself, So I think the grappling and the striking go hand in hand. And I think it's a shame that that people think that when you're lighting somebody up with multiple strikes, that they're not going to reach out and try and grab you and hug you and take you to the ground. You're mistaken. I've seen it many times, So you've got to have a way, to deal with groundwork, especially if you're dealing like with a good wrestler, right? Here you have more people, I think, wrestle than probably any other martial art, right? Why? Because it's offered in high school here in America, not so much in other countries, but here. And so you run into a lot of people who can grapple and who can wrestle. Okay, if they take you down and they're on top of you now, what are you going to do? Punch from the ground up? It's very difficult. So I think it's necessary to have both.
Yeah, just to add to what you just said, man, I was getting my friend ready for a pro fight, and his background is more wrestling. Even though we're in Japan, the kind of grappling has been very, very, his coaches have been focusing more on doubles, singles, and him having control from the top. And he took me down, and then my problem is I'm also coaching him while So like I'm teaching him how to beat me while in the middle of being beaten. So that's no fun. So when he was getting past half guard, before he kept having a hard time. If I got him in half guard, I could sweep him. And I finally told him, hey, we're doing ground and pounds, bro. Once you're in half guard, there really isn't an urgency to pass my guard because you're not getting points for that. You can literally just sit me down in half guard and start pounding me. And there's probably not much I can do. I really regret giving him that advice. But so
yeah, you do.
Yeah, I tell you that right now. But again, for those people that are like, Jiu-Jitsu is the answer. Jiu-Jitsu is really rough. It's really rough if you get stuck on that. But we'll get to that point later. Ron, how do you feel Jiu-Jitsu doesn't fit into Kenpo?
Well, I'm going to answer it this way. And I'm going to make a distinction between Kenpo and Kajukenbo because it initially did Jiu-Jitsu ever belong with Kenpo? I don't know. It is such a strike-centric discipline that I don't historically. I mean, there are a few takedowns, I suppose, in Kenpo, some kind of some sneaky leg checks and knee checks in Kenpo that work. That certainly can work, but there's not a body of content, jujitsu content that is within Kenpo, and there never was, and I don't know if it was ever intended to be. Now, if you ask me about why isn't, and the question was why is Kenpo or why is Jiu-Jitsu missing from Kajukenbo? Then I would say, why is it missing? Because I'm going to say because hey, you can't teach what you don't know, and so that would be my glaring reason why. Does it belong? Yes, absolutely, it does. It's what Kajukenbo was always intended to be. In fact, if you look at its humble beginnings, the whole Matsuno / Hulk lineage. Well, he was a Danzanru guy. He came out of the Okazaki lineage, and and Okazaki was noted for combining his arts. So, why is Jiu-Jitsu absent from Kajukenbo? I think because initially, again, you couldn't and probably shouldn't try and teach what you don't know and share what you don't know. Why is it missing today? That's a different story. I think today it's missing because unfortunately there's some ego involved there, and I was always no, I wasn't always told. I was told once and never asked again. I asked, ask one of those what if questions. I'm like, Agong, what happens if, stop class and, don't ask me questions. Don't ever question me. And okay. So I never asked any more questions, but I think the reality was that it just isn't something that everyone was aware of and knew of and had a working knowledge of, or significant or substantive knowledge of, and so it couldn't be taught. Today, it's a whole lot different, and Jello, I'm gonna say, tip your hat to Professor Tom here because there aren't a whole lot of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts, period. And to have a BJJ black belt, man, is that's like cream of the crop in terms of martial arts, and you can pretty well know that you can handle any situation in any given time. But also, having that knowledge is perfect for Kajukenbo, Kenpo as well, and to the extent that it's not part and parcel of of our art, particularly, I think we're long overdue to change that. So, yeah, why isn't it? because for those reasons, really, I don't, if you don't know it, you can't teach it. And if you only know what you know, then, there's a little bit of pride and ego that goes along with, well, you don't need that. Your Kenpo will sustain you if you're doing your Kenpo right.
Well, I'm gonna go ahead and say it without, because if people get pissed, they get pissed. For more information, there's a link here. Me and Tom did a nice long podcast where he talks about how he integrated jiu-jitsu into his Kajukenbo program and how that works. There's a link that way we don't have to go. That way Tom doesn't feel the need to go through there again and talk about his whole history. We did go into detail here, so check that link there. But I'm gonna go ahead and say it. Well, I think one of the biggest things with Kajukenbo is when I first walked in, they said there was jiu-jitsu in the curriculum. That's what I heard. It said jiu-jitsu. I was told the acronym: karate, jiu-jitsu. And at the time, I come from the late 90s generation. Internet's not that big. I've only heard of Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I've never actually seen Brazilian jiu-jitsu. They were still kind of, as Tom's talked about in the past, they were still kind of holding the knowledge and keeping it from being on the internet. So there was some stuff out there, but I did know what it was. I've seen it here and there, but I didn't know particularly all the details of it. It wasn't how it is now, where I can literally see an entire. I know what free rolling is like. You could, if you could, quick Google search, you can see quite a bit, but back then you couldn't. So that what I was told was jiu-jitsu was essentially kind of what could be considered more of Aikido. I would say Aikido and Judo, if I really had to break down what they were calling jiu-jitsu in the Kajukenbo class. And, it would be stuff like an arm drag into a osotogari, like an outside foot sweep, right?
Yeah.
And then something called a standing arm bar that I've never seen in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. There is no standing arm bar in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, but it was essentially locking out the arm to opening them up for striking, because essentially there was no submissions. The only submission I can think of that I learned, everything was an arm break. Did you guys learn submissions in your Kajukenbo curriculum? I'll ask you that real quick. No,
not us. No.
How about arm breaks? Did it say break the arm?
Yeah, there was some of that. Once you've gotten them magically to the ground.
Well, magically no, because you kicked them in the groin. Remember, that was always that's always there. It wasn't exactly magic. It was that you would beat them down, and they'd fall over from the beat down.
Yes, that's how it's supposed to happen.
So the question would be, I guess, rather than going into, so I guess you guys come from the other generation, so that's my question. That was what I saw. It was essentially, they told me it was jiu-jitsu, but it didn't look like, that's what it looked like for me. So I'm gonna grab that same question, because we'll go a little bit history here. What did it look like for you, Tom? What was the grappling? I know you went into a whole Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and I know you came from a wrestling background, but if we're just gonna separate that, what did you see happening? What was being told to you when you came in as far as the jiu-jitsu you saw?
Well, first of all, you need to understand that back in those days when Kajukenbo was being formed, right? You had the Bruce Lee era was starting. He was all over, Inside Kung Fu and Karate Illustrated and Black Gold magazine. You had David Carradine with the Kung Fu series on TV. So a lot of the founders in Kajukenbo just kind of veered that way, right? If you look at Kajukenbo's history, it went from the hardstyle Kenpo to the Chu and Fa, right? Which is the Chinese version of Kenpo, karate. And then you had the Tumpai, and then you had Aldakasko Sajid, right? So, Wunhap Kundo. So basically it just veered. And then you had all of the Chinese titles that came in, right? Yeah. So all of a sudden, like within a couple of decades, Kajukenbo became Chinese. You know what I mean? There was no room for the Japanese arts. And when I started, we had some wrist locks. In other words, if somebody grabbed your wrist, you would maneuver into a wrist lock. And what's interesting is I always found those useless, because what were they for? Basically, a wrist lock was so that when you went to draw your sword, your opponent would grab your wrist to keep you from drawing your sword. Well, we don't have swords today, you know. Maybe you can apply it with a handgun or a folder, you know. But that's what the wrist locks were for. So I kind of found them useless. We did have the arm breaks, like Ron was saying. We would take the person down, and and pin their arm between our knee and our other knee, and then we would break the arm, that sort of thing. But all of that was theoretical, you see. How are you supposed to really test that stuff? And this is what I found in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and why I thought it was so amazing, is that everything you learned, you had to apply against an opponent that was resisting 100% all the way to the tap, So I found that intriguing. But so that's what we had when I first went in there. Now, I went in there with a wrestling background. I had wrestled since I was 10, 11 years old, all the way to 15, qualified for the junior Olympics in wrestling. Of course, I couldn't compete because of a horrific accident that I was in. But when I started Kajukenbo, I found myself, being pulled to the grappling. I was sparring with my teammates, and I would grab them and start taking them down. And Great Grandmaster James Juarez just continuously would yell at me, "What are you doing? Get off the ground. This isn't wrestling. Tommy, get up, get up." So, so we grew up with that, you know what I mean? And I had this, and I already told you before, I think in a previous podcast, that I think when you consider the way we're built with our hands, right? 27 little bones, they're meant for grabbing. They're meant for intricate stuff like that, to try and hit somebody, and you hit him in the head. Now you break your hand. I don't think our hands were meant for striking,
No, they weren't.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, so that's what I had to deal with, and then finally, when I had the opportunity to do different things, I started in judo in 1988. I love the judo because, again, we as Kajukenbo, we claim judo, but doggone it, we were throwing like idiots. We didn't know how to throw. We didn't understand hips. We didn't understand kazushi, off balancing. We didn't understand any of that stuff. So when I started learning judo, I felt a completion in my Kajukenbo. And I didn't learn judo because I wanted to be a judo black belt. I was learning it to better my Kajukenbo. And trust me when I tell you this, if there was a Danzanryu Jiu-Jitsu around me, I would have probably tried to learn that instead of the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But it just so happened that a guy came into my academy one day. He was a blue belt. I told you the story. And then he was a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu blue belt. And that's the one and only reason why I veered towards that direction instead of the Danzanryu. We just didn't have it, So anyway, so to answer your question, I think going back, we went towards the kung fu side because that's what was advertised on TV and the magazines. You didn't see a lot of jiu-jitsu until a lot later,
And that was 70s?
Yeah, I started in 75 in Kajukenbo. Okay. Late 75.
So 70s.
So 75, if you can recall, man, all the I've got so many boxes of all the karate magazines. Every month I couldn't wait till the next one would come out. And that's all it was back in those days. A little bit of Taekwondo, a lot of Kung Fu, the stick arts, the Eskrima, not that much. And Jiu-Jitsu, what I would see about Jiu-Jitsu was a article in the back of a magazine where these guys in white geese called the Gracies were challenging the world, That was it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you didn't see a lot of jiu-jitsu back in those days.
So just kind of give you a timeline, what he just mentioned, what Tom just mentioned in the 70s is what I still saw happening when I turned 18. I turned 18 around late 90s, early 2000s. So still early 2000s, 30 years later,
yeah,
I'm seeing the same thing. So 30 years later, I'm seeing the same similar stuff that he just mentioned. A little more kung fu, Chinese titles. I assume there's a Chinese thing, and they mentioned jiu-jitsu, but more, not that much. But again, since I'm not exposed to it, and I'm not. It sounds like maybe you guys from the other generation, like my instructor said the same thing. He was always reading Black Belt magazine. He was really shocked when he first met me because I never read Black Belt magazine because I was in a rough neighborhood. We didn't have much money. It wasn't like I was going to pay for a I didn't have the money to buy a magazine. Like I wouldn't buy magazines. I didn't have that kind of money. So like I was never exposed to it. I never saw it. There was like this whole martial arts culture and inside Kung Fu and Black Belt magazine's part of that I didn't even know about till I met my instructor. And by the time I met him, I was already studying martial arts on my own with me and my cousin. We were reading books from the library. maybe I'd come across a black belt magazine at the library. Maybe. Usually I'd came across some old judo book, an old Jack Dempsey's boxing book. I came across that. So
Jack
like,
Dempsey.
yeah, I was reading like that for my boxing, and I was reading. I came across the Kajukenbo at the library, so I was reading that, and I was looking at the pictures, trying to figure out how are we going to use this in sparring. But like, that's so it was kind of weird. That's where I came from. So that's when I saw what I saw. That's what it's kind of crazy that 20, 30 years later, what you're seeing in the school, I'm still seeing. So now I'm curious, Ron, what were you seeing when you were in there? What year was it, and what were you seeing when you walked in as far as jiu-jitsu?
As far as jiu-jitsu when I began, or
Yeah,
as
like
far as
so, like same question I asked him, like, what were you seeing as far as what kind of grappling were you seeing? What would happen when you grapple? Like Tom talked about, his instructor would yell at him, and that's what you just said right there,
okay,
Tom, is exactly what happened
yeah,
to me. If I
yeah,
grabbed a guy and threw him on the ground, if I even like he would let 20 seconds go by, right? And if I'm doing like a ground and pound, he'd let 20 seconds go by, but then he'd stand us back up. And if it's the other way around, if I start rolling a little too much, if I start grabbing and going for chokes and I start like going more into grappling, I'd immediately be stood up and told to stay on my feet, because if on the
Yeah.
street, someone's gonna stomp
yeah,
your head in, is what they would say. So
yeah.
now I'm wondering, that's me 30 years later, but I'm wondering, like, in the past, what's going on, Ron?
So I'm similar to Tom here, and my Kajukenbo began in 1978
Okay.
with Tony Ramos in Fairfield. The first now, I also wrestled in high school. Rest in peace, Coach Cortez in Fairfield, California. I wrestled in high school, not a whole lot, but I enjoyed it. And yeah, I would play around, in the dojo, but that's all it was kind of playing around. And was it frowned upon? Not really, because I kind of did it kind of over in the corner where nobody was looking, and I'm just sparring with somebody, and he may throw a kick, and maybe I may grab that leg and sweep him and pin him, but my first really I didn't have much experience until no. I had no jujitsu experience or exposure in any of my Kajukenbo. Again, yes, in our tricks. Tom, did you guys go by tricks also? Did you guys use?
No, we did punching attacks and grab arts.
Grab arts.
Okay,
They did the
that's what we
punch
did.
arts.
It was we
Yeah.
did we did
Yeah.
we did punch
tricks,
and grab.
arts, yeah.
Punches. The punch arts were advanced. Grab arts were beginning or beginner. Um, there, there are a couple of punch counters in what I learned in Kajukenbo way back when, late 70s, early 80s. And today you can see it as, oh, that's Uchimata. But back then, you were kind of blocking and intercepting and maybe grabbing something somehow, and you were kicking out, the nearest leg to you.
Mhm.
Well, that kick out really was, again, if you look at it, that's Uchimata. And there were maybe a couple of other similar takedowns um, that most people paid no attention to. Certainly, they were never given a name. Okay, this is Osotogari, Ogari. This is Oroshi. Hip throw. None of that really was given a name.
Mhm.
Although some techniques were done, or we tried to do them, but like you said, very rudimentary. Um, with really no setup in terms of off balancing or kuzushi or ashigarama. Nothing that indicated that we really studied the throws and takedowns that we were attempting or supposed to be performing. So I had no exposure to jiu-jitsu until I exposed myself to it. And that was, I'm going to say, back in 2009.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So like, same thing. So now I'm talking about 30 years later. That was 30 years back, right? So and I guess we're kind of the elephant in the room, right? So at this point, the internet is around. Jiu-Jitsu. If all y'all were reading, if back then, 30 years ago, you karate nerds were reading Black Belt magazine and seeing that ad in the back, so you knew of the Gracies. Tom gets a free pass because he's got a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but everyone else, they knew, they saw it happening, and they just kind of turned a blind eye to it till some of them till now. Like what I'm trying to get at is, I will give you this, what you just said about the hip throw, because I love my instructor. He did show me a hip throw. He did some judo, and he called it a hip throw. Later, he didn't use the Chinese terms. He would say outside foot sweep, a hip throw. And to his credit, we brought in a wrestling coach, and we started learning doubles, singles, pins. He saw the importance of grappling, and he also acknowledged the fact that he didn't have the knowledge for it, so he brought an outside source in. So I'm not trying to throw my instructor under the bus here, but I'm just kind of looking at the entire thing as like the entire system, not just my school, but all the schools. That was when I did this 20 years ago. Now we got to add, right? Now we're in the 50-year marker from your timeline to my timeline combined. And we get to the elephant in the room and our final question: how and why should, the title of this podcast, Jiu-Jitsu be incorporated into your Kenpo or Kajukenbo? I'm gonna give this question over to Tom, and he's got the whole program set up. But if you want to kind of explain how and why someone can go about that if they're interested in that, and why they should.
Well, the why would simply be to be well-rounded. If you're a striker, fine. A man who masters his own art is a hard man to beat. But in the same token, if you get put out of your element, right? In the martial arts, we learn different distances: kicking range, striking range, elbow, knee, and then grappling, and then of course groundwork. I think as a martial artist, it's your duty to learn as much as you can. To be a perpetual student, as I always say. Right? I'll never stop learning. I'm 64 years old, and I'm still in my judo teacher's judo class. I'm still studying stick fighting with my teacher. So that's the why, just to be well-rounded. The how, well, we live in the information age. What excuse is there? In the old days, you didn't have a lot of schools in a particular town. Now you've got multiple schools in a particular town, and you can drive 20 minutes away and learn something, So I don't think that's an excuse anymore like it used to be. When I started learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, there were several teachers in the Bay Area that had less of honorable attitude, So what I would do is I would drive to a guy in Santa Cruz that I felt was a very, very honorable man. And that took me hours to drive there, just to train with him 2 hours, and then hours to drive back. So those kinds of sacrifices were important to me, but you don't have to do that anymore. Martial arts is everywhere now, including the internet. And I think once you get to a particular level in the martial arts, I think that you can learn very well off the internet. I don't feel that's the best way to do it. But if you are in a bind and you can't learn it any other way, and you have an understanding of a particular type of technique, I think learning on the internet's perfectly fine nowadays, But yeah, and the why and the how, there's no excuse anymore. You know what I mean?
Ron, same question.
I'm going to give a similar answer, and that is why? Because that's what we say that we do. That's what we claim.
Yeah, yep.
We claim to be that. So we why? Then yeah, we do what we claim. But beyond that, it's like I equate jiu-jitsu in any form of, whether it's Brazilian jiu-jitsu or judo, or Kosen style judo, anything with some serious newaza. If you can't do it, for sure. Why? Because I look at jujitsu as like water. The planet is 75% water, and you can't swim.
Yeah,
You got to be able to.
good
I mean,
point.
if you can't swim and most of the planet is water, eventually I'm just going to stay on land. I'm going to stay
I'm
on
going to
land.
use that one.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
going
all
to use
yours.
that one.
All yours.
That's good.
If you plan to stay on land, good luck. But you're pretty restricted, and you're not ultimately prepared for the inevitable, which is one day you're going to be in water, and you need to know how to swim and how to do that. As you said, Tom, it is. I started in '09, and yes, it was online. I was started that Gracie curriculum online, and one of my black belts, who is also a black belt in BJJ, I would go to his school too because he incorporated Kenpo and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You just you make it intentional. You intentionally say, "This is what I have." We now have we now have um, we now have our traditional karate, right? Which is really what our Kajukenbo is. We have our boxing now. We have a guy who comes in 3 times a week or twice a week or whatever, and we put on hand wraps and gloves, and we learn the sweet science. Shouldn't we have also known that? Yes, because that's what we say that we are. But we don't, we didn't, and so we go and learn it. The same thing with jiu-jitsu and the same thing with judo. You learned it, now you can bring it in. Might be a little clumsy at first. It might not be as seamless as you want it to be, but hell, look at you know mixing the arts it's an art in and of itself. It's just it's never ending in terms of the how, but you must do it. How you do it, I think it's up to every person, every individual, or every group of instructors to figure out their how. But because you don't quite know the how, is no excuse for not knowing the why or not having the why. You
Yeah.
can do it, and it can be incorporated. It can be incorporated eventually, and then it does become seamless. I'll give you an example of some of the curriculum that I changed from and to. Um, I changed to the Ordonez Kajukenbo curriculum, uh, and Uncle Frank Ordonez was a jujitsu guy, right? Um, I mean, he descended from the Okazaki lineage. And with many of the techniques, I mean, there's some really good takedowns. There's some really good throws. There's some really good finishes. Finishing with chokes, finishing with arm constrictions.
Well, just to,
I mean,
just to quickly
yeah,
interject what you're saying for anybody who's wondering about the Danzan Ryu, I just talked to the contact jiu-jitsu champion. I had him on the podcast a few weeks ago. And
uh,
I didn't even know he was a Danzan Ryu guy. We were just talking about him competing at the contact jiu-jitsu tournament.
yeah.
And it came up that he was a Danzan Ryu guy. So like, yeah, there's some really cool stuff. And I've actually rolled with guys because I kind of wanted to see what the Danzan Ryu guys did. After I was a blue belt, almost a purple belt in BJJ when I finally found a Danzan Ryu guy to roll with. And the first
Yeah.
thing he said was like, we really don't do things that way. Because I just said, let's do some focused sparring in a position. We'll start in close guard. He's like, why don't we start standing? And I'm like, because I have a feeling standing. I just really want, I really want to get this out of the way. I really want to see what's going to happen when you're on the ground in close guard. Because if it's jujitsu, you'll know exactly what to do. And I didn't tell him that. I just said I want to start in close guard because I want to avoid injury. But the honest answer was I really wanted to see if you can get out of close guard. Because if you know jujitsu, you should know how to get out of close guard. Especially we were in gis. So yeah, especially if we're in a gi, you really should know that. And he did, to his credit. So sorry, go ahead.
No, that's great. I love that. I love that. I think that in terms of how do we do this, I think that if you can start And I'll start with, I'll always say, here's what I believe, and that is a fight. The best training for a fight is to train for an amateur MMA bout. Why? Because you're going to see so much of a lot of different things. And I mean, that really replicates, the fight that we should be training for. Now, that doesn't mean to train as to be an MMA athlete. That just means if you're going to protect yourself and you're going to be in a fight for as long as it may last, you probably should be ready to employ your boxing, your striking, your kicks, your grappling, your takedowns, your submission. You should probably be prepared to employ those things because ultimately, the fight today happens kind of like that. And if you're not prepared for that, then you're not prepared. And so, again, with the intentionality I'm talking about, just go into it, go into whatever you do, whatever you teach, however you run your school. Think about what a fight is. And as Tom alluded to earlier, I don't have big hands, and they definitely weren't created for knocking off heads. So if we're not intended to be strikers naturally anyway, what do we do? Most people, what do? They reach out and hug the other person and try and try and subdue them, take them to the ground, grappling. That's what we do. So, I mean, if that's the case, the how should be pretty easy because I have to do this. I have to incorporate this. Now that I know it and I know what it is and I know the benefits of it and I know how well it works, I have to incorporate this. That to me doesn't matter a whole lot. What matters more is your why, and you have to learn this. You have to. It's if you're Kajukenbo, you have to learn. You have to know this. You have to.
Otherwise, it's just false advertising. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
So we're the original mixed martial art.
Yeah. So otherwise, that's what I'd like to say. So again, I want to thank you both for being on the show, but I think anything we can walk out of this is the why. Maybe the why theoretically, if we already got the why out of the way. I think I love both of your stories because you both have different hows, right? Tom, you drove 2 hours away because the BJJ people in your area weren't exactly the people that you wanted to work with. I've had a very similar issue where the BJJ people in my area were not people I wanted to work with. They weren't very, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, there's not a lot of them. There's only one. And he's not a very nice person to work with. Let me just put it that way. He's not easy to work with. And then the other person I worked with for about 8 years through a school that will remain unnamed and unmentioned, an organization that's an international organization. I won't say their name. I worked with them for 8 years, and then they told me I had to shut down my Kajukenbo program and I had to leave because I wasn't going to do that. And now the person I'm working with now, I'm now in a distance learning program because of that. Because, well, what else am I going to do? Where else am I going to go? And why am I sharing this? Because if you are really hell-bent on the how, you will figure it out. If you're really hell-bent on the how, Ron, you found one of your students. You did this is learning. Oh, wait, one of my students has a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. And then I kind of did the field of dreams. I if you build it, they will come. I built my gym. I put jiu-jitsu on there. I have a distance learning thing. Been doing jiu-jitsu with the gi for 8 years. Been doing no gi for 10 years. When I first got out to Japan, I went into submission grappling, and they were doing no gi. Did that for 6 years. Got my ass kicked for when I first started, but I got better. If you're really hell bent on that how, then you'd be surprised. Like in my case, the Field of Dreams case, then I did have jiu-jitsu people come in here. Now I do have people here in my program, in my grappling program, I have people who are 4th degree. Oh, recently, here's a fun story. Recently, I'm not teaching judo because I don't know judo. But when I brought this up, one of my neighbors is like, hey, my kid is just getting creamed in judo. It's slammed everywhere. Can they come do jiu-jitsu with you? I'm like, well, I don't do judo. And then I asked one of my white belts, who's also one of my brown belts in Kajukenbo, who's also a police officer. I said, I got this kid coming in to do judo. Didn't you see him you did judo for a while? He's like, yeah, I'm a 4th degree in judo. I'm like, oh, thanks. Thanks for letting me know. You've been training for me for 5 years.
Oh man,
that's something that crazy. Remember when I first asked you? You walked in, have you had past martial arts experience? And you just kind of casually mentioned, I did some judo. That would have been like a nice thing to mention for you.
Right. Way to bury the lead.
But either way,
could have led with that a few years ago.
It could have led with that. But I was like, all right, well, now great. Hey, when that kid comes in, can you go over some judo stuff with the kid? He's like, yeah, I appreciate it. So again, the whole field of dreams thing. I think the why is almost more important for Kajukenbo guys, because if you don't think it's necessary, you're not even going to go into the how. But once you got the why out of the way, you just got 3 perfect examples of how, if you're hell bent, you'd be surprised. Start asking your students, maybe one of them's 4th degree black belt in judo, you don't even know. But anyway.
They say that if the why is big enough, the how doesn't matter.
Right. It's a good one. Well, Tom, thank you so much for coming out on your both of you. I don't know how this happened. I was joking with Tom off camera. It's like when these guys are on vacation, they're coming on the podcast. I want to thank you for coming out on your vacation and sharing your knowledge with the world on my podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Angelo.
I'm always honored to. Always. Hey, big shout out to you, Tom. You run a hell of an outfit down there in the valley, man.
I appreciate it, Ron.
You're doing it.
I appreciate it. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure meeting you.
Oakdale MMA and Sonora MMA as well?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yeah, it's a pleasure meeting you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And then to my viewers, thanks for checking out Social Gelo with Angelo podcast. What are the podcasts about martial arts? Once a week. Catch y'all next time. This has been a Social Gelo production. If you're interested in being on the show, feel free to reach out. Just email me at socialgelo@gmail.com. Don't forget to follow me on social media, Instagram, Social Gelo, Facebook, Social Gelo with Angelo, or follow me on my personal page under Angelo Ferrer. LinkedIn, search Angelo Ferrer. YouTube, if you're listening to this on a podcast platform, make sure to check out my YouTube channel, Social Gelo with Angelo YouTube channel. And wherever you're listening, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other platform, make sure to follow and subscribe and leave a review. Thanks again for tuning in. See you next time.